you want from me? 'Cause I can't stay, I can't stay. No one ever said that it might not be.
Hello and welcome everyone to episode 11 of Be the Wellness Podcast, our extra special presentation for the last week of the beginning of spring, or whatever that means.
Hello everyone. Hola. ¿Cómo estás?
Bean.
So this week we have sort of an interesting podcast because we fielded out a bunch of questions last week about what topics you guys would want to learn about on the podcast. And we got a lot of great responses. Obviously, we're not going to be able to go over everything today, but we are going to be addressing all of those questions over the upcoming weeks. So we will get to them as quickly as possible. But today what we wanted to do was cover kind of an overarching theme about reproductive health and hormones in general. There were several questions asked about reproductive health in general. And then furthermore, there were specific questions on the effects of perimenopause and menopause, those effects on building muscle, burning fat, why it's harder for women in general to see the same results as men do. Kind of a whole cascade of things going on there that have to do with hormone profiles and reproductive health. So hopefully you guys can stick with us through this topic. This is a pretty intense topic for sure.
Yeah, it's a big subject, and there's a lot of, it's just hard to know how much people know about these things, right? So this was what I was kind of doing a little bit of research and digging around and finding that, I didn't know a lot about this. It's just, and why would I, right? It's not something that I study necessarily, right. But it is something that, we definitely need to tackle. And I'm kind of thankful for the opportunity to, kind of get forced into diving deeper into this subject, because it's something that is, it just warrants a better understanding. Yeah,
it's a daunting subject. It's kind of like the cholesterol thing where it's very nuanced. There's a lot of factors that influence it. And particularly for women, the hormone subject in general is just a pretty intense one because we're all so different and we have such influencing factors in each one of our lives that affects the outcome of what's going on. So one of the things that Adam and I tried to do is he sort of is going to introduce the concepts and I'm going to try to reiterate them maybe in more basic terms because this is something for me that I think works well. And I don't know if anyone's like me out there, but sometimes if I'm not as familiar with the subject matter, it becomes really difficult for me to just listen to people that are clearly more familiar than me on the subject. So we're going to try to bounce back and forth and say it in different ways so that hopefully between the two of us, you guys are able to understand each of the concepts as we progress.
Yeah. And then you don't have to just listen to me drone on and on about this stuff.
Even though he has a radio voice.
Yeah, my droning radio voice. Yeah. So in researching some of this stuff, I just want to kind of share a little bit of my resources because I do really think that they're both excellent sources. And one is Dr. Robert Sapolsky. I don't know if you guys have heard of him, but he is a Stanford University professor. He's been doing primate studies for 35 some odd years, and mostly related to their sort of social structure and the stress levels that are associated with them. Incredibly interesting stuff. He wrote a book called Why Zebras Don't Get Ulcers, which is probably one of the most comprehensive books on the human stress response and kind of how it works for us primates. It's an excellent book, totally worth reading. I think he has a documentary out too, which is pretty entertaining. Yeah.
Yeah, we watched that at some point. I can't remember the name of it, but he's a fascinating guy and we highly recommend anyone to check out his works.
Yeah. Yep. So Sapolsky, and then on a much, closer to topic note, Stephanie Rupert, who wrote the book Sexy by Nature, and she runs a website called Paleo for Women. And she really has a very good grasp on this stuff, and specifically how the paleo diet kind of works. So I've borrowed heavily from both of their, knowledge pool books and websites. And hopefully we can kind of make some of this stuff make sense.
Yeah. And just a side note, Sexy by Nature for women out there. I refer a lot of women to this book as sort of the primal blueprint for women, if you will, because we are different. And most of the paleo books they're not necessarily male focused, but by default, that kind of seems to be where a lot of the research lies and that kind of thing. So it's nice that she is taking on the subject matter from a woman's point of view. So I highly recommend her book for a plethora of reasons, but especially for women who are just getting started in the paleo sphere.
Yeah, it is one of those things. We'll talk about it a little bit more, but there's just an unfair advantage to being male in this for whatever reason. I mean, paleo is not magic for everyone, but it's magic for a much higher percentage of men than women, and that's
yes.
So
that actually might be the real topic of this podcast is why it's not fair.
Yep. Sorry.
Yep.
Okay, so there were several questions that were asked about reproductive health in general, and some kind of specifics around perimenopause and menopause and building muscle and burning fat, and like we were just discussing, why it's harder for men or for women to see results. And so we're gonna dig in, kind of with an overview of reproductive health, for lack of a better term, and kind of how some of this stuff plays into each other and whatnot.
Here we go.
So basically, I feel like we need to kind of define perimenopause and menopause, just so that we're talking about kind of the same things here. And so perimenopause is the onset of infertility, characterized generally by decreased egg production and fluctuating estrogen levels. And there's kind of some averages on age, but there's so many factors that play into this, and this is what we're going to discuss ad nauseum here. It's very nuanced. So perimenopause, onset of infertility, decreased egg production, fluctuating estrogen. Menopause, you're at the point where you are no longer producing estrogen, very, very low estrogen levels, or completely absent. From a measurable perspective, no more menstruation, and almost entirely absent egg production.
Got it.
Did I capture that? Okay.
Yep, you did good.
Cool. So the two sort of primary concerns here that we can talk about with these specifically is postponing perimenopause and menopause and lessening the side effects of both once they do occur, because they're going to. Like, this is just another one of those facts of life. Women specifically have a plethora of incredibly accurate, detailed, and important biological clocks. And when they start clicking, or I should say, when they stop clicking, they stop clicking. And outside of, we'll get into all the rest of that. So we're looking at postponing this stuff is really what we're trying to do. And postponing perimenopause requires more or less optimizing the health of your ovaries and preserving eggs and decreasing the amount of menstruation throughout your lifetime. And that's basically what it comes down to. You only have so many cycles, and when you run out of them, that's the end of the line. So one of the sort of markers of people who have very late onset perimenopause are people who've been pregnant for a significant portion of their time. So if you have a bunch of kids during that 9 months, that's, you're not cranking out eggs. So you're saving 9 eggs per year or something like that.
Right. What is it? The Duggars? What is it? The family that's on TV, they have a reality show and they have like 20 kids.
Kardashians.
Yes, the Kardashians.
Yeah. But I think that's a completely different sort of menopausal thing that's going on with Bruce.
No, we're just clearly talking about two different reality shows here. Okay. But nonetheless, okay, less periods, you can stave off menopause.
Yeah.
Carry on.
You're keeping your eggs.
Yes.
Okay. So, right. So postponing perimenopause, optimize your health, preserve your eggs. That's just kind of the jam. There's there's no doubt. I mean, there's a lot of variables that we're talking about here, but there's no doubt, and we know this with absolute certainty, that increasing your health, like we do generally speaking with the paleo diet, stabilizing your hormones, and decreasing stress are probably the things that are going to help, aside from being pregnant for the majority of your life, are going to help push this stuff back. Right. So just general increases in health. So,
which is really interesting, because if you think about it, a lot of times we look at the paleo diet as sugar stabilizing, which of course it is. But if you think about it, one of the maybe undersung qualities of this diet is that it is hormone stabilizing. And that is one of the most important things about it.
Yeah, absolutely. And not just the diet, but the lifestyle in general, right? So adequate vitamin D, adequate sleep, all of those kind of things play a huge role in sex hormone production. Okay.
Yes.
So yeah, eat paleo, work on your stress reduction. We'll keep going. So then
postpone menopause.
Yeah. Postponing menopause, on the other hand, requires not just optimizing the health of your ovaries, but also optimizing estrogen production, or slowing the loss of estrogen, right? So this is because, if you remember back 15 seconds ago to the definition, this is when your body's producing such small amounts that it's almost absent, right? So, so this means that having a low estrogen condition, like something like hypothalamic amenorrhea, which is, we're just going to call it HA moving forward, because we're going to talk about it a little bit, which is what happens when your body shuts down your menstrual cycle predominantly from stress. I mean, there are some like actual disease related pathologies that'll do the same thing, but for the purpose of what we're talking about here, this is your body's stress response that shuts down your menstruation.
Right. And this is it could be from under eating, over exercising. It could be for all of those things can be involved in creating this particular scenario.
Totally. And usually a combination, right? So under eating, over exercising, overstressed, all those kind of, other stresses. All kind of fits right into this AH situation. Right. Yeah. More or less. So what's happening is your body's, it is starting to live off of its stress response for the most part. It's almost like advanced adrenal fatigue, where the only way you're getting up and cruising throughout the day is on adrenaline. And so what ends up happening is your body starts to sort of, turn all of its functions towards maintaining that adrenal system. And we'll talk about that more specifically. So something that, I guess the point where I was going with this is that something like AH that lowers your estrogen levels prematurely can accelerate the onset of menopause. And maybe I should just preface this a little bit. Part of the reason we're talking about these things is because one of the things that I think makes this the most confusing for people is that a lot of the information that you get about menopause is from someone else who's going through menopause. I had this happen at such and such a time. And this never has happened to me, and all of this stuff, which can make it really confusing. So I guess what we're trying to do is sort of highlight that there are a lot of differences, and we're just going to talk about a few of them here, the ones I think that we probably have the most control over. Right?
Got it.
Okay. So premature loss of estrogen, whether it's from a stress-related response like HA or anything else, can kick you into menopause early. And so this is one of the reasons why you hear people talking about eating soy as a way to maybe stave off a little bit of the menopause symptoms, because of the phytoestrogens that are in it. Can replace some of the estrogens that you're not getting elsewhere or have gone missing. And that's, there was actually a good question on the feed this week about tempeh and fermented soy, and whether or not, that's paleo or primal or whatever. And generally speaking, there's, aside from the phytoestrogens, there's just not a lot in there that you would want, and there's actually the vast majority of people probably don't want those phytoestrogens. This is like a one specific situation where it may be helpful, right? But soy's complicated, and we can talk a little bit more about that.
Well, and the other thing is, unless you have a severe case where literally you know that your menstrual cycle is shut down and you say, okay, well, I'm going to eat soy just for this cause, just to try to get some of those phytoestrogens kicked in, you overall wouldn't know whether or not you're someone who could benefit from that or not. So You're sort of eating soy thinking, okay, well, I mean, for the most part, if you're paleo anymore, I don't think that soy is really on your plate for the most part. But, a lot of times it's just a shot in the dark whether or not the phytoestrogens are harming you or benign or doing, helping you slightly.
Yeah, or helping, right?
Right.
Yeah, totally. And that's, it's one of the problems with not going and getting tested for stuff. Right. So you go get your hormone levels checked and all of this kind of stuff. And then you're like, oh, well, you know what? Actually, I am deficient in this right now. And then you start to get into this much deeper thing of, well, I should probably test quarterly for at least a year to determine what my natural cycles are before I start supplementing. I don't know. That's a whole other thing.
It's complex.
It's complex.
It's complex.
And we're just getting started.
Yep.
Okay, so that's low estrogen, right? And so then conversely, if you happen to have high estrogen, like some sort of an estrogen dominance situation, then it could do the exact opposite, which is stave off menopause until a later time, right?
Right. The problem is, how do you know if you're estrogen dominant, right? So someone that is estrogen dominant, it might present as, you have heavy periods or heavy cramping, severe PMS and mood swings, those kind of things that kind of clue you into the potential of that estrogen might be a dominant factor in your fertility scene.
Yeah.
But the bottom line is, either way, the goal for everyone is to always create a more stable situation for their body to come into an optimal hormone balance. So, estrogen dominance might be cool for staving off menopause, but it's not cool for like the 45 years of your period cycle.
Yeah, totally. Well, and then there's also a potential with estrogen dominance where there's like your estrogen levels are normal, but your progesterone levels are low. And so that can be even a more odd thing, issue. It's like a whole different thing. But yeah, this is the part that kind of cracks me up is like, so the symptoms of being estrogen dominant are these horrible PMS symptoms. And what that estrogen dominance that gives you these horrible PMS symptoms is going to do for you is extend the amount of time that you continue to have these horrible PMS symptoms. You're like, Jesus, just give me menopause. I mean, I don't know.
I just want to be in menopause. Yeah. And so really quick, we know many of you out there are already experiencing menopause or perimenopause, and we'll get there, but we wanted to make sure that we're on the same page with the terminology and the difference between the two phases. And then furthermore, we just wanted to talk about, stress here, which we're going to get to in just a moment as an overarching theme for the entire picture. So I know, I can hear you women out there saying, well, this is great, but what if I'm already in menopause?
Yeah, now what?
Yeah, so we're going to talk a little bit about the stress response and how that affects your reproductive health and hormone levels. And, this is just one of the things none of us can get around no matter where we are.
Yeah. Yeah, this is going to get you. So, human stress response. All right. So the response to a stressful situation kind of happens in two different places. This is like a 30,000 foot view of it. First, it occurs immediately in your sympathetic nervous system, right? So this is your like fight or flight response. You get the increased heart rate, increased breathing rate, sweating, your pupils dilate, you get higher visual acuity. Some people have even claimed you can hear better. I mean, it's all the heightening of your sense, right?
Right.
Senses, not sentence.
Kind of that fight or flight.
Yeah, fight or flight,
response.
Right? You're getting ready to do something. So it happens there. And then secondly, the amped up signal is relayed to the endocrine system via your hypothalamus. And immediately your HPA axis, which is your hypothalamus pituitary adrenal axis, right? So this is where all of the things kind of come together that control your adrenal system for the most part. So HPA axis gets adrenaline pumping out of the adrenal glands. Secondarily, cortisol is secreted into the bloodstream, and the the cortisol is fast. I mean, this happens in like almost real time, but it's a bit slower than the nervous system response. And since that's the case, since it's based more out of your bloodstream, it lasts longer, right? So you get that immediate central nervous system bump for the fight or flight component, and then you get a cortisol dump, which can take a period of time to clear from your blood. And right. So this is especially true if this is like a chronic stress, right? So if it's something that doesn't run its course quickly. So like, for example, if you hate your job, so for 8 hours a day, you are just having this chronic low grade stress response because of the way that you feel about your job. That's even worse, right?
And I think all of us have had jobs that we feel that way about. Yeah. This job is ruining my life. Yeah. No, it really is.
Yeah, no, it may in fact be. It's entirely possible. Because so cortisol, right? Everybody, well, I mean, cortisol's gotten somewhat of a bad rap, and because in one limited function, it's doing a bunch of detrimental things. The reality is we need it. It's what wakes you up in the morning. But it has a lot of the same physiological effects as activating your sympathetic nervous system, at least kind of on the surface, right? So it spikes your blood sugar, it inhibits digestion, it puts a halt to your immune system. It's like your body's redirecting energy to deal with whatever the emergency is.
Right.
And this can go on and on and on, right, for a long period of time if you're sort of in this chronic state. So the question becomes, how does our body produce this much cortisol, right? So we're constantly flooding the system with cortisol, and where do we get this stuff? And the short answer is that it steals it. So your body will redirect the common building blocks of adrenal hormones, specifically pregnenolone, and from its ordinary functions, and divert it to production of cortisol, because your body just thinks that you're in this life or death situation, and so what could be more important than producing more cortisol,
right?
So
and protecting you.
Yeah, exactly. So it enables a ton of cortisol production, but it inhibits the production of just about everything else. And this is where your stress levels start to dramatically affect your sex hormones specifically. So,
right.
So just to kind of go to the top of this ladder, so cholesterol is the mother molecule of the entire endocrine system, right? So mitochondria, controlled by the adrenals, they convert cholesterol into pregnenolone. From pregnenolone, all the rest of the hormones are produced. And so like two things can happen from there. The pregnenolone can either be converted into progesterone or it can be converted into DHEA. And DHEA is the precursor for all of the other sex hormones like DHT, testosterone, luteinizing hormone, stuff like that. And basically the cortisol is stealing the precursors for everything else that's important. I mean, that's really what it comes down to. So this stressful situation is going to take all of your pregnenolone from the production of DHEA and shunt it to cortisol. And your body is going to continue to do this to its own detriment because it thinks that the highest priority is this emergency stress situation, right?
Right. And for those of you who are asking about mindfulness, and we'll do more on mindfulness later, but just listen up, because this is where mindfulness really plays a huge role in our life, is getting through these stress responses, having go-to ways to calm our system and get rid of this response that we're talking about specifically.
Yeah. And for some, it may be the only way to do it.
Right.
Believe it or not. It's like, I think that might be where I'm finding myself. So a couple other things to note here, because we've been talking a lot about the adrenal system, and then we're also talking about sex hormones. And so I think some people may not understand that how related they are. So first, the non-dominant sex hormone, so which would be testosterone in a woman or estrogen in a man, they're often produced in the adrenal glands at higher levels than in the gonads. So your gonads are doing your dominant sex hormone, and your adrenals are producing the other. So, for example, the largest source of testosterone in the female body is in the adrenal gland, even though she does produce small amounts, of testosterone in her ovaries. The vast majority is in the adrenals. Secondly, the production of sex hormones in the adrenals is still important to the overall level of sex hormones in the body, particularly for maintaining a healthy balance. And so this is kind of where we start talking about that perimenopausal period where you have these fluctuations in estrogen. In a woman, that estrogen would be the dominant hormone being produced in her gonads, in her ovaries. But it's incredibly important that her adrenal system still be able to keep up to sort of smooth out the bumps in this fluctuating, production from the ovaries, if that makes sense. So the adrenal glands are capable of like immediately responding to the hypothalamic signaling, right? So whenever your body says, hey, we're a little bit low on something, the adrenals can kick it out quicker than the ovaries can. So another reason why it's very important for the adrenal system to be operating at an optimal level when you're trying to balance your hormones. So, and then the third sort of critical feedback loop here is that cortisol imposes a negative feedback on the HPA axis. So cortisol signals the hypothalamus to downregulate signaling of the pituitary. So when you have these elevated cortisol levels in your system, the production of hormones in the gonadal tissue actually decreases. So it's kind of a double whammy, right? Mm-hmm. And this is actually the primary way that stress inhibits your reproductive function, right? For lack of a better term. So this whole thing is called the pregnenolone steal, right? So therefore, at face value, very simple phenomenon. Your body just steals the pregnenolone to keep, continuing to produce cortisol. Stresses it out, shunts hormone production into the pathways that are meant to be helpful in times of need, right? So this is this fight or flight thing.
Okay, so basically we're recapping again. Stress is bad because it's stealing your hormone precursors and down-regulating hormone production. So that's kind of the takeaway here, right?
Yeah, totally. Double whammy.
Okay. The other thing we wanted to talk about is more on the mind-body connection and how this affects the hormonal cascade. So this is kind of a side note, but it's interesting enough that we thought we should include it here. So why don't we talk about specifically how HA and stress are interrelated?
Okay, let's do that. Yeah, so there are a few different things here, but since we've kind of been talking, we've already thrown out the hypothalamic amenorrhea as our word of the day. So we're going to keep talking about that as the specific disease state, for lack of a better term. So HA typically results from a combination or a coupling of psychogenic stress with some sort of energy imbalance. And psychogenic stress meaning like stress that's generated inside your mind, right?
Right.
Yeah. And energy imbalance, generally speaking, either you're not eating enough or you're exercising too much, one way or the other. You're low on juice, so to speak. Both ways, right?
You're not eating enough and you're stressed out, basically.
Yeah. Mental stress and some sort of physiological stress from a lack of food, right?
Okay, got it.
Yeah, so you don't see this in people who are training ridiculously hard but then eating 7,000 calories a day like this, it's kind of
right. So it's kind of the anorexic
model.
Yeah, it's kind of the anorexic model, right? It's basically starving out and doing too much work. And clearly, if you're anorexic, you're also having the emotional distress that goes along with the eating disorder and the overexercising. So it's kind of that model that we're looking at. That's obviously like the worst case scenario, or, like on one end of the pendulum, but that's sort of what we're looking at, right?
Yeah, totally. So, that is the sort of the extreme version on one side of the spectrum, but that's precisely it, right? And so what you find though is that generally the social stress and the metabolic distress are present in people who have HA, right? And the two stressors are so intertwined that you like in the studies and stuff, you almost can't study one without including the other, because you just can't really determine what's causing what. They're both doing the same thing. Sure. They're just acting from different angles, right?
Sure, makes sense.
Yeah, so the general belief is that psychosocial dilemmas activate like neural pathways, right? So like worrying about your job, that worry stems from your prefrontal cortex, and your prefrontal cortex signals the HPA axis that says, hey, this is a stress. And then like the opposite of that would be, or the the counterpart to that on the physiological side would be exercise and weight loss disturb the HPA axis from metabolic disturbance, right? So like you worked out too hard and didn't eat, right? So the brain's worrying about something, hits the HPA axis from one side. The body's physiologically stressed about something, hits it from the other side. So psychogenic stress almost always has a metabolic cost as well, meaning that, like you get stressed out, it causes, more energy to be absorbed in the brain, right? So the psychogenic stressors often stem from like a perfectionism or body image kind of a thing, where you have some expectation of what you're supposed to look like, or some sort of performance that you feel like you should be able to do, and maybe you're not getting there. And that creates this internal, hence psychogenic stress.
Right.
Right. Which unfortunately, when we start talking about the perfectionism and like the body image issue kind of stuff, these things are going to be stressors that are sort of focused around food and food restriction and excessive exercise. Right. So this is where, exactly like you were saying earlier, it just like the anorexia or orthorexia model fits really well. You're just overtraining, under eating, and worried about the way that you look. Which is probably like, I don't know about the overtraining part, but I'm sure the worrying about how you look is nearly 100% of the population. Yeah, it's true.
It's true. Yeah, the HPA axis is getting hit from one way, probably for all of us a lot of the time.
Yeah, it's true. That is what's up.
You're damned if you do, and you're damned if you don't.
Yeah, it's true. Yeah, so it's just getting hit, right? So the HPA axis is just getting worn out, and that's a real significant brummer when it comes to trying to maintain healthy adrenal function and healthy hormone balances. So
got it. Okay, so we got it. We know the axis gets hit different ways, but at the end of the day, it's all cumulative, right? So everything, whether it's from over-exercising, under-eating, your thoughts, your axis is getting a big whack all the time. So
yeah.
I think we're going to talk about a study where they actually looked at this.
Yeah, so this is one of the things and this is some Sapolsky action right here, and I think is incredibly fascinating. So I'm gonna work my way through it here. But there's been multiple studies, but in one, which was kind of a big one, and it's sort of a landmark study across 1,200 menstrual cycles in monkeys, right? So they tracked them for a while. That's a lot of menstrual cycles. The stressed out, socially subordinate monkeys constantly or consistently exhibited ovarian impairment, where the others didn't. So
don't worry, everyone. They didn't stress the monkeys out. The monkeys were stressed out on their own.
These were just
I was
socially
worried about that.
Yeah, totally. No, but these are just socially stressed monkeys. Their own particular hierarchy creates a social stress for them, right?
Right. So, apparently, there's stress even in monkey societies.
Totally. Yeah. So in primate societies, very much as in our own, there's it's inherently stressful to be sort of at the bottom of the social ladder, right, in comparison to being at the top. So what all the researchers had to do in order to study the stress levels on these monkeys was to study the fertility and monitor the behaviors and the physiology of the lower rung monkeys versus the higher rung. So they just looked at sort of the social caste and made a direct comparison between the two. And
got it.
Yeah.
Do we know how they decided who the lower rung monkeys were? I remember reading the study, but I can't remember.
Well, you can just tell by watching them, right? So there's like some who get the priority on food. They have their choice of mating partners. They,
got it.
Sit around and pick fleas while everybody else cruises and does stuff. I mean, it's like you watch them, you can tell. You're like, oh, and even like what's such a trip about it is you can tell just sort of the downtrodden posture, of the like second class citizens, so to speak. They don't carry their chest upright. They're sort of in this, they look submissive. Like they're on a computer. You know what I mean? They're all sort of like kyphotic and hunched forward, Yeah. And that's just their state of being. Mm-hmm. So,
which came first, being on the computer or being depressed?
I don't know. I don't know. It's tough to know.
It is tough to know.
Yeah. So in any case, these low rung monkeys, right? Their cycles increased in length and variability. So they're like their odds of being viable from a reproductive stance went down dramatically, and their levels of progesterone I'm having a hard time with this word today. Yeah, with progesterone,
yes,
and estradiol, which estradiol is just one of the estrogens, dropped significantly. So you see it in A, their ability to actually reproduce, and B, in the actual hormonal measurements, that these buggers, who were just in a less fortunate social situation, are just kind of screwed. So and then as kind of to be expected based on the last 30 minutes of rambling, they also experienced elevated cortisol levels, almost in a perfect inverse relationship with the estrogen. So as their cortisol levels went up, their estrogen levels went down. And we also saw some stuff, or they also saw some stuff in there with osteopenia, right, which is like a precursor to osteoporosis. So pretty clear indication of what's up, right? These elevated cortisol levels from whatever it is, pretty directly affecting your estrogen levels, and hence totally screwing with their reproductive ability.
There you go. There you have it. Looks a lot like our society.
Totally. Oh, and then they also tested soy on the monkeys. So they took the low rung monkeys and gave them soy, thinking that maybe they could help them increase their endogenous estrogens, and it didn't work. So
soy's out for everybody.
Yeah, even monkeys. Yeah. So right. So that didn't work, right? But the thing that did, and the only thing that had the power to sort of change their reproductive capacity, was this psychosocial circumstance change, right? And that made an incredibly significant impact.
So I wonder how they did that.
How they did
how they increased their social standing.
Well, I don't think that they did. Or if that was
just a natural occurrence and they monitored it.
Yeah, I think it was a natural occurrence and they monitored it. And then what they determined was that by, as their social status lowered, things got worse. I don't know if they actually elevated anyone to like king monkey somehow.
Okay.
I'm not sure that.
Just checking.
Yeah.
I'm just fact checking here.
Yeah. It's a good question. Though. Like,
no,
they just
curious.
gave him. They like pulled him aside and said really nice things to him, like lots of compliments.
Gave them baths. Gave him a blowout.
Yeah.
Things were looking up for that monkey at the end of the day.
Totally. Yeah. So okay. I mean, it's pretty telling that there's an incredibly significant link between our adrenal and hormone, and hence subsequently reproductive status based on our social status.
Right.
Which, or our like in this day and age, I guess more our stress levels in general.
Right, because our social status would kind of equate to stress levels essentially for us.
Yeah, to a large degree. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Got it.
Pretty
fascinating.
Crazy. Yep. Yeah, so circling all of this stuff back around to this sort of stress-induced amenorrhea. There's a lot of different things that go on there. You've got eating disorders and personality disorders and drug use and external, and then intrapsychic stresses. So we're introducing lots of really fancy words. Intrapsychic is a pretty good one. But what really is going on with intrapsychic stress is it's like negative self-talk, right? Mm-hmm. So for example, if you think you're fat, if you think you're stupid, if you think you're ugly, if you think you aren't good enough or whatever, or if you think other people think those things about you, that you're fat, stupid, ugly, or not good, then that is what they're considering intrapsychic stress, right?
Got it. And this is the stuff that also kills HPA axis as well, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Intrapsychic stress, right?
Yeah, totally. So it's an internal psychogenic, stress that is often self-imposed, right? Whether it's some sort of societal pressure or whatever, that's just what goes on. So, in another study on actual humans, they basically they took a test, or they took measurements and compared women who had this stress-induced hypogonadism, which is basically what we've been talking about, right? So the increased levels of stress, decreased level of stress or of sex hormones, right? Hypogonadism. They were compared to normal women, and then they were compared to women who had hypothalamic hypogonadism from other pathologies. So not a stress-related one, right? So you got stress-related hypogonadism, normal women, and then non-stress-related hypogonadism. And what's crazy about this is that they found that the group of women who had the stress issues were the only ones who, in these behavioral tests, measured unrealistic expectations and like dysfunctional attitudes about themselves. Right.
That's amazing.
Yeah. So it's like not even necessarily just that they were depressed because their sex hormones were low, which we know that does happen, but it's why they were depressed or why they were low. They were in these stressed out situations that dropped these things, and it put them into these positions of having, like, you know, weird body image issues, you know, or actually maybe the opposite, right? They had weird body image issues in which, you know, caused this stress. In any case, yeah, it's just ridiculously fascinating to me. And I guess, you know, it probably, I mean, it just makes sense, I guess, but it's just a trip that it doesn't really get talked about more. I don't know.
Well, yeah. And I mean, I think this is sort of an underlying theme for a lot of women who come to the paleo sphere, is that many, myself included, have dealt with this kind of self-talk, if you will, and are looking for ways to quiet the monsters inside of our minds, which feeds back, you know, this perfection, this sense of perfectionism interferes with social approval, and then the social approval feeds back on what perfect is. So all of a sudden, women have this stress-induced hypogonadism and the intrapsychic conflict that might be difficult to resolve. So it's tricky.
Yeah, because how do you? Yeah, it really is tricky. How do you treat a disease that results from low sex hormones, but also causes low sex hormones? You know what I mean? You're like,
yes.
Yeah, it's crazy.
I think this is when a lot of women, and I wrote my success story on Mark's Daily Apple, and I think this is like, if you can get through your whatever it is, your 30 days or your 60 days or whatever it takes to kind of regulate the cascade of hormones, there's like a light that comes on one day and you go, oh my gosh, for the first time in my life, I'm out of this fog of worrying about food, worrying about how I look, worrying about when my next meal should be, all of these things that are just constantly going on in your brain. And, you know, you think it's just, oh, you know, I should think better, I should have positive thoughts, or these are things that I can't control. But like, the whole thing feeds into this vicious cycle. So it doesn't just become that you're unable to think positively or you're unable to control your thoughts. Your hormone scenario is actually making it so that you keep thinking those thoughts in a way.
Yeah, exactly. You're just
crazy.
Yep. Yeah, it's a unfortunate cycle is what it really seems to be. And then, like, I mean, kind of to say what you were just saying in a different way.
Yeah, I love that.
Yeah. The what they tend to find is people who have these stress-induced hypogonadism problems. And this is actually true for men as well in this particular case. People that have stress-induced deficiencies in hormones have a really hard time doing the things that they need to do to fix it. So they have a hard time relaxing. They have a hard time having fun, you know, and it's just, it's a really unfortunate thing, because that's exactly what they need, you know, but it's the most difficult thing to actually do.
Yeah. It's a lot like depression, right? It presents the same way as those sort of symptoms of depression, where it's like, okay, the things you need to get yourself out of the cycle, you can't do because you're so depressed. Yeah. So, I mean, obviously there's some other things going on with depression and some in the neural pathways and such, but it's very similar in that sense. You gotta almost, you have to fight the hardest uphill battle to do the work that you absolutely don't want to do right in the beginning. And then eventually it will catch up and the things will be a little bit easier and your body will regulate.
Hopefully.
Hopefully, yes.
But then there's this reality that at some point, your body's going to stop producing these hormones no matter what.
Still going to abandon you.
Yeah, your gonads are going to leave you behind.
They will, those damn gonads. They're worse than children.
That's true. Just hang out through all your good years and just drop off right at the end.
Abandon you and leave you with a little extra body fat and thinning hair. It's not cool.
Not fair at all. So it is really, it's just one of these things like this. The system needs a chance to recover from the stress, right? But it's not just a physical rest and recovery. I think, and this is something that we kind of need to look at and I think it's what you were referring to earlier with some of the mindfulness stuff, is that we really have to look at this sort of psychological healing picture of this and address it just like we would, increasing your deadlift.
Absolutely.
It's like you need to get in there and do the work that fixes these parts of your brain, these negative self-talk, situations and get that stuff squared away because it's not doing you any good.
Well, and a lot of times when, women are at the peak of the negative self-talk and all of these things going on, they're also at the peak of trying to get through college, start, getting married, starting careers, having families. They don't have time to say, oh, I really need to chill out and relax. So, learning these 10-minute mindfulness techniques or learning how to integrate the mindfulness pieces throughout the day are so crucial because it's not like you can just say, well, this is, my kids and my family and my job are really stressing me out. So I need to stop that because it's creating an issue with my gonads.
Yeah. You're screwing up my gonads, people.
But, this is the truth. You need to integrate it from the get-go, just like you were saying. It's like exercise. The earlier you integrate that as a mainstay in your lifetime, the better it will serve you and the easier it will make the cascade of all these things.
Yeah, for sure. And, and it just works, right? So this, I promise, is the last study we'll talk about. But there was there was another study that they did on women who specifically had HA, the hypothalamic amenorrhea. And so these were pre-menopausal. So these women were of childbearing years, right? So they had normal, prior to getting HA, they had normal menstruation cycles. So 88% of the women in this study recovered completely normal menstruation with 20 weeks of cognitive behavioral therapy. So no hormones, it's hard to know really. They didn't really talk about diet or anything, but the only intervention, some of the people may have changed their diet, but the only intervention was this behavioral therapy where essentially they were going in and helping them with their negative self-talk, right? So 88% went back to normal with this little fix. It's just nuts.
The other part of that, is that like you mentioned it almost just as a Freudian slip or whatever. And you said some of them may have changed their diets, but that's the other piece of it is when your cognitive feelings change and become enhanced and you feel better, oftentimes you eat better. So it sort of works, synergistically. All of a sudden you're like, normally you go home and you just want a piece of chocolate and a glass of wine and that turns into a pie and a cake and 3 pieces of pizza.
The next thing you know, you're smoking cigarettes.
You're chain smoking cigarettes.
It's true though. It is that thing of feel like shit, eat like shit.
Absolutely.
Like that definitely happens.
You are what you eat, whether it's if it's the former that creates the latter, who knows, but they definitely work together. And so once again, the mindfulness thing just comes into play as like, okay, well, this is maybe like sleep, maybe one of the most important things that we can look at for our wellness picture overall. Yeah.
Again, quieting that mind, man, getting things squared. So we went deep on that.
We did, yeah.
Which is, I don't know. We'll see. Let us know, people, if this sort of senseless, random, bad banter is desired or not. But good job if you're still listening.
Right. So the big question is, so we want to maintain a healthy reproductive system and optimize our hormone balance. So, is the paleo diet the solution?
Yeah. Yeah. And the short answer, much like Windex, much
Yes.
like Windex, the paleo solution or the paleo diet works for everything. But in reality, it really is. I mean, it just makes sense, right? All the things that we know about our, if you look at things through the sort of evolutionary filter, the best gene expression, the best possible expression of who we are, the complex genetic makeup that we have, is going to be realized through this kind of diet. And that's just, we just keep seeing it over and over again, right? So this is going to be good for your hormone balance. It's good for healthy egg development. It's good for regular and fertile menstrual cycles. It's, it just works, right? We avoid the diet, almost strictly avoids a lot of the insulinogenic foods that were normally found in these kind of high calorie, high sugar, inflammatory meals that you eat on the standard American diet, right?
Right.
Yeah, and like we said, it avoids soy, which it's it's a complicated problem, but in some cases it's bad for people. In some cases, very, very, very narrow, subset of cases, it might be a good idea. But so the paleo diet just does all of these things. It increases your overall health and vitality. And if anything, we've seen that seems to play a really big role in your hormone balance and continued hormone production.
All roads lead to paleo.
Turns out.
It turns out. Well,
yeah. Well, they all came away from paleo. All, you know what I mean? Like yes. At some point, all roads originated at paleo.
Yeah, exactly. Well, and maybe all roads lead to mindfulness too, because really, if there's another sincere theme here, it's that mindfulness is such an important part of our wellness picture, maybe even more than the food itself. Although, I don't know, maybe not more than the food, but the mindfulness is such a huge component. It can't be underestimated.
It just really is, I really think that for some people it's just going to be magic. It's like and they're not going to have to go this deep, but I think that this, if you've been doing the diet for a while and you've been strict on it and you've been making sensible changes in the rest of your lifestyle and you've been making sensible changes or following some sort of, sensible strength and conditioning program, the next place to turn the spotlight is inside, a really deep introspective look at what you've got going on is probably what's warranted, Yeah.
Well, and you can see the paleo movement is shifting in this direction. Many folks are starting to talk about doing self-therapy and, a lot of people are doing plant therapy, going down to Peru, doing ayahuasca ceremonies. There's people that are seeking to quiet the monster that's inside of us. And, part of that is through diet and exercise, but there's a real spiritual or emotional or whatever mindfulness piece that is so important for everyone to take the time to dedicate and focus themselves to that part of it as much as anything else.
Yeah, for sure.
So, so we've basically, we beat the fact to death that we believe in paleo and mindfulness. So I guess you guys, you figured that out.
Yeah, exactly. Now. So if there's anything that the takeaways here are that we think hormones are really complex and we think that mindfulness and paleo are probably just the best ways to treat all of it from the top down approach. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, and here's the thing, there are women out there listening who are not menopausal or perimenopausal. They're in their childbearing years or, some version of that. And they think that they have a lot of time to fix this stuff. They think like, okay, well, I'm not perfect about my diet and maybe I hate my job and maybe I'm stressed out. And they're busy and they also just think, well, I'll fix it later. But there's no time like the present, because once you get to the stage where you are perimenopausal or menopausal, it's an uphill battle.
Yeah, there's less that can be done.
Yeah, and that's sort of the next thing that we're going to talk about here, because a lot of people that did have questions had questions about, it's hard for me to build muscle. It's harder for me to lose fat. And guess what? You're right. It is. And I wish we had a surefire way to say, well, if you ate more protein and less carbohydrates, it would be just as easy as when you were 25. It's just not the case.
Yeah, it's really true.
If you're perimenopausal or menopausal, it's just harder. And, you know, I'm not saying this so that we burst your bubble and make you sad about the reality of what's going on, but rather it's time to be easier on yourself and recognize that it is harder. And, you know, you're going to have to probably work harder, but you're also going to have to be easier on yourself about the expectations and the results that you expect of the work that you are doing.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, I think that's a huge part of it, is that, you know, certainly not to be defeatist, but to be realistic, you know, and that, and I think it's more for your own, I don't know, peace of mind, you know?
Yeah. And, you know, I know that all of us want to look beautiful and have that sense of beauty and vitality, but there is a time in our lives where we have to recognize that it's a little bit more difficult. And unless you want to dedicate yourself 24/7 to being beautiful, it's just going to be a little tougher. And
well, yeah, I mean, let me just jump in there, because like that, and this is I'm going to interject my personal opinion on this, living in Los Angeles and seeing what people will do, especially women, to try to maintain, I think what you were just saying is this culturally accepted image of what they think is beautiful. And my opinion is that it does not resonate. You know, like someone who is happy and healthy and genuinely loves themselves looks so much better than someone who doesn't. You know, I think I'll just leave it at that. He's chasing the dragon.
Yeah.
Yeah. Because it's, you know, we get old, you know, like we get older and things change. And the more you can be at ease and like with grips with that, I think just the better it translates, you know?
Yeah, I agree. And, you know, there's this certain thing, especially in Los Angeles, that happens where women, you don't actually look any younger. You just look weirder.
It's true. You look preserved. Yeah.
But, you know, and like, once again, we're not trying to say there's nothing that you can't do. Obviously, hormone replacement therapy is a real thing that people can look at. And that is just like, once again, I want to make the comparison to the cholesterol situation, because it's very similar in the sense that you need a doctor who really knows what they're doing.
Yeah.
This is not half-ass, okay, we gave you a basic hormone panel and now we're going to just start throwing things at you. This is someone that knows the intricacies of the endocrine system so intimately that they know how to affect things upstream and downstream, like we were talking about with mobility. It's the same idea with hormones.
Yeah, no, it's true. And you just need a good one. And
yes.
I mean, I've done a little bit of research over the last year or so trying to find a good one. And I'm telling you, when you come across them, you'll know, because they just know everything they say makes total sense. You're like, oh, well, that seems, I mean, yeah, it's a complicated subject, of course, but with your approach, the things that you're saying make absolute sense.
Right.
And you don't hear a lot of, well, you know, I mean, I think if you just try some of this and some of this and some of this is the standard cocktail. You'll be on this for a year and then come back and retest. You're like,
right.
No.
Well, and especially for women, because if you start down the path in the wrong way or an inappropriate way, you're going to be even more out of whack. So it's really important that you find someone who can start, you know, conservatively and can, you know, try things very, you know,
there should be a method to their madness.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. And Adam was lucky enough, he was able to go see Joe Rogan's doctor, the one that was on his podcast a few months ago. And that, like Adam said, when you hear him speak, you're like, okay, this guy knows what he's talking about. So I know not everyone can fly to LA and go to this guy's doctor, but you know, that's the kind of person you want to look for, someone that just resonates and you say, okay, they know what they're talking about.
Yeah, totally. And I don't actually, just to clarify, I'm not sure that he's actually Joe Rogan's doctor.
Oh, okay.
But he's been on his podcast a few times.
Oh yeah.
Like I suspect that he is, but I'm not gonna come out and say that Joe Rogan is on hormone replacement therapy. I don't know if that's true or not.
We just violated like 10 HIPAA regulations.
Something like that. Yeah, I don't think that any of that's true. But yeah, it's any case, if you're going to do it, the long and short of it is that people have been getting old without hormone replacement for a long time. But just know that it is an option, and I do think that my research has sort of led me to believe that a lot of the sort of negative social stigma around hormone replacement and even some of the science around it is the negative science, I should say, is somewhat ill-founded. And if you can find an endocrinologist who has a kind of like we were discussing, he has a good plan for keeping you at physiological levels of hormones, I think it's pretty dang safe. That's obviously you're going to want to do your own research and stuff, but as long as you're staying in that sort of physiological or super physiological level where you're not, way over what a 25-year-old male would be on testosterone, you're pretty good. And
no roid rage.
Yeah, we're not. Obviously, that's not a good idea. But that's not what we're talking about. We're talking about just maintaining. Yes. Slowing the decline, so to speak. You're stretching out your glide slope a little.
Right.
Yeah. Anyway.
So I think we beat this one. Well, actually, we didn't beat this to death. We barely scratched the surface of what this topic encompasses, but we dove into it as deep as we're going to today. And hopefully, if you guys have questions or you want some follow-up about this information, we'd be happy to do that.
Yeah.
And we will be talking about some of the other questions that came through on the feed in the next couple of podcasts.
Yeah, totally. And so I know we made this a part of a challenge to just, throw out, or a part of the question to, hey, what are some things you'd like to see on the podcast? But if there's stuff that comes up that you do want to just make a post, tag us in it, say, hey, it would be cool if you could talk about such and such. You don't have to wait for us to ask. Although we do have a pretty significant list now. It may take a while for us to get through. But yeah, cool stuff. Yeah, so it looks like Vanessa's Skype connection just timed out. So she's off the set. And I'm going to say our goodbyes. So thanks for listening, you guys. And we'll talk to you all soon. Peace.
Chase a dream, even if it breaks me. You can't change my mind this time. I'm gonna fly free. I don't wanna leave, but I gotta say goodbye. I gotta say stars. gotta say goodbye.